Disclaimer. All my captured footage horribly artifacts when uploaded to YouTube. I tried multiple solutions, from increasing the bitrate to ludicrous amounts, changing the encoder, etc, blah blah blah. Nothing worked. Believe me when I say I can run this game fine without hiccups, and that this game looks amazing, especially after a few mods. You'll just have to believe my word on this one, tell, don't show. I love The Witcher 3, but I hate promotional material that misrepresents the product. The Witcher 3 downgrade controversy is well over 2 years old now, but the only decent video I've been able to find going over it is in German. As a huge fan of the Witcher games, and the series in general, I feel that a video documenting the differences between the pre-release and retail builds needs to be made. This video will discuss what was lost, some mods that mitigate the downgrade, and my own personal gripes with it all. Before I get into it, I need to bring up CD Projekt eventually admitted to the downgrade because the 8th gen consoles weren't quite as powerful as they expected. This doesn't make the downgrade pill any easier to swallow, but it does, at the very least, place CDPR leaps and bounds beyond companies like Ubisoft, who refuse to address anything related to the blatant graphical disparities between their E3 and retail builds. Secondly, you need to know that YouTube compresses image quality to an absolute pulp, especially after you download the videos off YouTube and re-upload them. Don't compare the image fidelity, but rather the effects you see on screen. With those details out of the way, I can begin. One of the three big things everyone notices from the 2014 E3 gameplay, all the way back to the initial 2013 debut, is that the lighting is better than what we have now. Back then, CDPR used a technique called volume-based translucency, which does as it sounds. Light isn't stopped by the first object it hits, otherwise light would never reach the surface of the Earth. Light passes through some materials, gradually becoming dimmer and dimmer depending on the material. It is for this reason why stuff like foliage looks so much better in the early demos, despite the assets for foliage being the exact same in the retail build. I'm almost certain that the art style of this game was designed around this technique, since not only do outdoor environments pale in comparison to what they were before, but ambient lighting looks completely different. Indoor environments lack translucency and have reduced the amount of light cast by various sources, making rooms look less evenly lit. To compensate, CDPR added this absolutely atrocious looking artificial light onto characters. One of the misconceptions I see people throw around is that the foliage is lower quality in the final build. The game is using the same assets for foliage as it did back in the E3 2014 demo. Translucency was removed, so the vast amount of different lighting values in the environment were reduced, with this being most notable in the outdoor areas with an abundance of foliage. Outdoor scenes are now less dynamic. Something is either in shade, or it isn't. Funny enough, foliage draw distance was one of the major facets upgraded from development to release, having a much farther draw distance than seen in the 2014 demo. However, CDPR managed to mitigate the advantages of an increased draw distance by decreasing how far light reached, and by adding this abhorrent, obnoxious distance fog for some god-forsaken unknown reason. I want to save what mods to use for later, but in the name of Maciej Konowinski, use this mod called Extended View Distance over on Nexus, which removes this fog. When you're playing with a draw distance of Ultra, or even just High, the game's exteriors look significantly better. Another removed graphical feature that made the outdoor environments look better than they do now, particularly areas that use a lot of stonework such as Novigrad, was Tessellate Terrain. Tessellation is a technique that increases the ruggedness of the geometry on whatever it's applied on. You can see this in-game with water, where messing with the water slider changes the degree of tessellation on the waves. Tessellate Terrain is pretty GPU intensive, but the result is a far more complex environment. A feature like this is especially useful for The Witcher 3, which doesn't have very high-resolution environmental textures. Tessellate Terrain was removed, and I suspect it was removed not too long before release, possibly a few weeks before release. There's a terrain slider in the options menu, but it doesn't change anything as NVIDIA has found. I suspect it was meant to do the same thing as the water slider and change the degree of tessellation. We'll never know for sure, but right now we have a completely pointless slider in the graphics menu, and it's been that way for over 2 years. Since we're on the topic of water, we get to discuss the second of the three big things that were downgraded. CDPR rendered water in what they called a flexible water simulation. This provided a dynamic, organic system, as we could see in pre-release footage of Geralt sailing, pirouetting through water, the way dynamic blood decals drenched the swamp marshes, etc. This system was completely removed in favor of a less taxing, less impressive, scripted version. I'm not completely positive about this, but I believe changing water to a script-based solution affected gameplay as well. One of the trailers showed Geralt sailing high waves in a storm, which is something completely absent now. The reflection quality on water and in general was also downgraded. CDPR boasted real-time screen space reflections in the past, and they looked beautiful in the VGX trailer. High-quality reflections shimmered off water, Geralt's armor, and looked gorgeous combined with the lighting. Screen space reflections are still in the game, albeit only on certain bodies of water. Puddles in the swamp, armor, and several other materials no longer have any reflections to speak of. The screen space reflection quality was downgraded for surfaces it's still present on, as the clarity of reflections on water don't look nearly as impressive as they did in previous builds. This harsh downgrade in water and reflections is probably what made sailing in Skellige the most visually underwhelming part of the game for me. All the graphical effects compounded on top of each other to make a beautiful sea in the E3 trailers, and the removal creates something pretty lackluster in the retail build in comparison. There were two other graphical features removed that made Skellige in particular look even worse when compared to pre-release footage, those being aerial perspective fog and semi-volumetric clouds. Aerial perspective fog simulates the haze and blue tint effect we see in the distance as we look towards the horizon, depending on the time of day, the location, etc. Volumetric clouds do as they sound, and are actually still at the game at Kaer Morhen. They're not in Skellige anymore, though. Mostly. Curiously enough, they show up when you're on top of the mountain during the Last Swish side quest with Yennefer. Why only then? I couldn't tell you. The last of the big three features to be removed was forward-lit particles. This way of rendering alpha effects was responsible for the jaw-dropping smoke and fire effects displayed when Eredin burned down a village in the Sword of Destiny trailer. Some of the most memorable scenes from the trailers were because of the beauty of all the alpha particles flying around. In CDPR's graphical suite video, they showed what the game was like with the forward-lit particle renderer turned off, and that's how the fire and smoke looks now. It's evidently clear the art style of the game was designed with this renderer in mind, since the fire is probably the worst looking thing when we compare the retail build to earlier demos. The billowing smoke and blazing embers are no longer present, causing scenes that once featured forward-lit particles to be pretty anticlimactic. There are some features in the game that were shown off at Tessellate Terrain's graphical suite back in 2013 that are still present. Hairworks is an, albeit inefficient, simulation of fur. Bloom and light shafts made it into the game untampered. Tessellate water, still in the game. Sadly, there is more to the downgrade than what's in this video. The environmental LED was dropped compared to the 2014 demo, but thankfully this was partially undone in the 1.04 patch. The amount of little things that cast light and the amount of shadows in the environment were culled. Several little neat graphical touches were removed. The sign Quinn, for example, used to cast a full force light, casting a shadow on Geralt and the surrounding environment. Stuff like that was removed for a couple extra frames. And that's about it. I didn't cover a few things, such as how CDPR reduced particle density, for example, but I've covered everything important. Now for the fun part. The question, why was this done? Why downgrade the game? Well, CD Projekt admitted the 8th gen consoles were not as powerful as they expected. The Witcher 3 had started development in 2012 before the 8th gen consoles launched. Usually consoles launch at the power of a mid to high-end gaming PC, but the PS4 and Xbox One were only as powerful as low-end gaming PCs when they launched, to the surprise of many. After the 2013 VGX trailer, CDPR started downgrading the game to run consoles. This is kind of obvious because the E3 2014 trailer and gameplay looked mildly worse than the VGX trailer. So the downgrade process had actually been occurring since 2013, not just after the 2014 demo. If you compare the VGX trailer to the 2014 trailer, though things like dust picking up as Roach galloped were gone. It's unfortunate that a lack of horsepower forced the developers to compromise their own vision, but it is what it is. The retail PC game is essentially a port of the console game, which was a port of the original PC game from 2014. There are a few problems I have with this. 1. We weren't informed about the downgrade. It wasn't until after the launch that CDPR admitted they had downgraded the game, deflecting accusations along the way. Even if the game absolutely had to be downgraded, suddenly releasing a product that looks worse than the marketing material is disingenuous. People expected the product shown off at 2 E3s. Not clarifying the downgrade is misleading and gives people all the right to be angry. 2. Consoles not being able to run the game is no reason to downgrade it. Why were certain graphical features completely removed? We can see in CDPR's own video that these features can just be turned off. Stuff like Tessellate water and the fur simulation are still in the game and can be turned off in the options menu. Why couldn't these other features be turned off in the console releases but be made available on the PC? It's not as if the PC wouldn't be able to run the game. Mid-range gaming rigs were already running The Witcher 3 at 1080p Ultra at 60 FPS when it launched, so why downgrade it? If the answer is for the sake of platform parity, then that's a horrible excuse. The PC community is what built up the Witcher games to the point where CDPR could even afford to port these games to console. Downgrading a game series they built up onto consoles is a slap in the face towards your longtime fans. 3. CDPR set a precedent with The Witcher 2. The Xbox 360 version of The Witcher 2 was released a year after the PC version so it could properly run. It's one of the best looking 7th gen games on the PC and the 360 because CD Projekt prioritized the PC version, then worked on properly porting that to console, not the other way around. It seems this is what CDPR was doing with The Witcher 3 before deciding to prioritize the console version over the PC version near the end of development. Once again, this makes the community that built up the Witcher franchise feel cast aside. I understand video games, especially like The Witcher 3, are expensive and releasing the game sooner than later for consoles is ideal. But CD Projekt did what was best with The Witcher 2, releasing the PC version first, then the console version later, ensuring that they weren't limited in terms of scope. This even had a positive effect of allowing the PC community to give feedback so certain things could be improved for the Xbox 360 release. If CD Projekt was worried The Witcher 3 wouldn't generate enough money as a temporary PC exclusive, thus they couldn't continue development on the console versions, then the fact that The Witcher 3 was one of the top 12 best-selling games on Steam in 2017, 2 years after it launched, should effectively dispute that, especially when you consider the GOG version is more popular than the Steam version. Number 4. The art style of the game was evidently designed around having these graphical features. Quite a few areas in The Witcher 3 look like they're lacking that one little extra thing to push them into the next tier of graphical fidelity. The wooded areas in Velen would have benefited from lighting translucency. Skellige would have benefited from volumetric clouds. Novigrad would have benefited from some Tessellate Terrain. The swamp would have benefited from real-time reflections. The list goes on. The whole thing just reflects poorly on CD Projekt. I'm concerned with the compromises they made with The Witcher 3 and how it's going to affect their future titles. They've abandoned prioritizing the PC version for parity across all platforms, and the marketing material for this game is made in English first instead of Polish now. I'm concerned that CD Projekt is going to compromise their vision at some point for the sake of mass appeal, if they arguably haven't already. Enough complaining. There are 2 ways to improve the visuals of The Witcher 3, one through modding, and the other needs to come through CDPR. Let's go over the mods first. The Extended View Distance mod fixes a few things. 1. It removes the ugly-ass distance fog. Secondly, it can remove the artificial character lighting if you choose so. While this makes characters difficult to see in certain cutscenes due to the lack of proper ambient lighting, it's overall worth it in my opinion. The third thing this mod can do is add ambient occlusion to foliage, which I highly recommend. Volumetric Clouds in Skellige does as it sounds and re-adds the clouds meant for Skellige into Skellige. I haven't been able to get it to work sadly because I suck. The Witcher 3 HD rework kills 2 birds with 1 stone. It adds screen space reflections back into smaller bodies of water, and increases the resolution of the game's environmental textures. Areas in Novigrad that previously would have featured tessellate stonework now feature a higher resolution stonework, for example. Improved particle system increases particle count on various alpha effects back to their original density. I wouldn't recommend using this if you already drop FPS when using signs. Also, be sure to download the no shader variant of this mod, or else it crashes your game when you enter a city. E3 Quinn causes the Quinn sign to cast a light again, as well as changing the color back to blue for the sake of continuity with The Witcher 2. More Shadows adds a litany of shadow casting sources back into the environment, making the game look far better. It has the additional benefit of enhancing any mod that removes the artificial character lighting, since interior areas will have more detailed lighting. There are lighting mods, with the most popular being Super Turbo Lighting Mod and Wiedźmin Lighting Mod. There's quite a big misconception surrounding these mods. The lighting mods for this game change color values and, for the most part, don't improve the game on a technical side in any way. You can use these mods, but beware, these are more a matter of personal preference rather than straight enhancements of the vanilla lighting. There are some I&I edits you can find on NVIDIA's optimization guide for this game, linked in the description. These help reduce pop-in on various factors, highly recommended if you're using a 1070 Plus or a Vega card. Finally, you can turn the game into a horror game by downloading Geralt's Face Fusion mod. The problems with mods is they generally aren't as well optimized if the developer had just added these features themselves. After all, how well do you think a project from one passionate fan would compare to an experienced programming department that works on this kind of stuff for 8 or more hours a day? This leads me to my second solution, which is definitely not going to happen, but I'm hopeful for nonetheless. I want CDPR to do what they did with The Witcher 1 and 2 and release a Witcher 3 Enhanced Edition. Note, this is not a remake. In the past, CDPR came out with a build of the game that minorly improved several graphical and gameplay features. This build was available as a free upgrade for those who already owned the game, and became the only version available to purchase thereafter. I know this is a request that will never be answered, but imagining CD Projekt do this makes me ecstatic to no end. The Witcher 3 is still selling well to this day. An Enhanced Edition might give people on the fence that little extra push. That's pretty much it. I still love The Witcher 3, after all I'm replaying the game in Polish right now. My admiration for The Witcher 3 and CD Projekt doesn't make me any less disappointed in CDPR for the whole downgrade debacle though, or prevent me from longing for what could have been. I hope you can all understand, because the last thing I want from one of my favorite RPGs of all time is for it to be considered one of the most downgraded games of all time.